Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode number 9 of our ConfigMas 2022. My name is Johan, and as you can see, I have Andrew with me in the studio. Hi there, Andrew. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here today. How are you?
Very, very good. And I'm super excited because
Awesome.
rumors are that you have a shiny demo prepared for us.
I do. I actually wanted to talk about Autopatch a little bit today, if that's all right with you.
That will be certainly okay. Let me go ahead and share your screen there. We'll simplify things a bit, I think.
I think so. So I figured today I'd just talk a little bit about what Autopatch is, walk through kind of the changes and configuration that you may have to do within your tenant, and show a little bit of what we can get out of the reporting within Intune. So Autopatch is a cloud service that Microsoft released earlier this year that automates patching for Windows, Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, Microsoft Edge, Microsoft Teams, and to make sure you are reaching your patch compliance goals, improving security, and things like that across your organization. So this is obviously patching several of Microsoft's first-party products. And really what this does is helps you as an admin get away from having to schedule and group devices on your own. This service will actually do that scheduling and grouping of devices to help you roll out your patches automatically, which I think is a pretty neat thing for sure. So there are a few prereqs that we have to have in place to onboard our tenant into Autopatch. We have to have Windows 10 or 11 E3 or higher. We have to have connectivity to several Microsoft service endpoints, which probably isn't a surprise if you're already running things like O365 or Intune in your organization, or have extended out to any of the Microsoft cloud services. The endpoints that are going to be patched through Autopatch have to be Azure AD joined or hybrid Azure AD joined. So no just plain workstation joined devices there. The devices have to also be corporate owned and either managed through Intune exclusively or co-managed with Config Manager. And the co-management workloads, the bare minimum to be able to enroll those devices into Autopatch are the Windows Update workload, device configuration, and Office click-to-run apps. So once we have those prereqs in place, I have a tenant here that has not yet been onboarded into Autopatch. If we start at the beginning here in our Intune portal, we go to Tenant Administration, and we have a Windows Autopatch category right here, and you'll see a tenant enrollment link. And when we click that, we get a little blurb about what Autopatch is, and that we have to run a readiness assessment tool for the to actually onboard the tenant. And this tool will actually go through and make sure you have those prereqs in place. Basically, all you do here is select the checkbox, click agree. Takes a couple of moments here to look through those prereqs. I knew in this particular tenant I wasn't going to hit all of the prereqs, so of course I can't onboard this tenant. But we at least get this nice little overview of if we're ready to onboard to Autopatch or not. We can look at the details here, and we can see what is or is not ready as it relates to the prereqs in our tenant. So, for example, I know that in this tenant, I don't have the proper licenses, the proper Windows or Autopatch licenses to onboard my devices.
Yeah, in my tenant, I hadn't configured the unlicensed admin setting, and that will stop me until I change that one. So it's nice to have this little check here. So good stuff.
Makes things a little bit easier. There's a lot of other services that we've onboarded that don't have this, and you kind of have to figure it out as we go along, right? And I don't know about you, Johan, but there's several times that I've forgotten a simple prereq like signing a license or something like that.
Never happened. today.
It's all rumors.
Yeah.
So that's all right that we can't onboard this tenant. It just so happens that I have another tenant that has already been onboarded, fortunately.
Just like you're like one of those professional chefs on TV. Like, oh, here is the cake.
Yeah, that baked pretty quickly. So one thing that I wanted to talk through here is the changes that you'll see within the tenant when you enroll into Autopatch. So as we saw in the other tenant, in our tenant administration tab, we just had a tenant enrollment link. But if I go here to this tenant that has been onboarded already, we see that our Autopatch category has added a few things here. I'm not going to click through all of them because there's some personal information in here, because when you actually onboard into Autopatch, you have to provide, one of the requirements is providing specific admin contacts. You have to add a primary admin contact and a secondary admin contact. And at that point, you have to provide some contact information, including a phone number. So that's what that admin contacts tab is there. But we'll see messages related to the service health and things like that within our particular tenant. Again, you may be familiar with these through Intune or through O365. We'll see some related messages. We'll see a service health dashboard related to the Autopatch service. We can put in some support requests for Autopatch right here within this node. And then if we had any tenant configuration changes we need to make, I believe they would pop up here. Thus far, after the last month or so of having this tenant onboarded, I haven't seen anything pop up here just yet. Some of the other things that we'll see with Autopatch, as you may be familiar with in Intune, we have everything as far as profiles, Windows update rings, things like that. Applications have to be assigned to Azure AD groups, whether they're groups of users or groups of devices. So Autopatch will begin by adding several Azure AD groups. And if I click over here, we can just take a look at what some of those are. So most of them are going to be prepended with Modern Workplace. And here we'll see they've got a pretty decent naming convention, I think. We'll see the rings that will be assigned the proper update rings. We'll see whether or not we have Windows 10, Windows 11 devices. We'll have some roles for Autopatch specifically. And then if we scroll down a little bit more, we'll see some additional groups for Autopatch and some additional rings. And what we'll also see if we go into our devices, this section here has been added, Windows Autopatch. We can see devices, and I'll go through these momentarily, but these are devices that are onboarded or ready to be onboarded. We'll have a couple of other tabs, devices that haven't yet been onboarded through Autopatch, and some additional devices that may have an issue. Say, for example, we tried to register the devices into Autopatch, but there was a failure or some other issue bringing them in. Here we'll also see a release management tab where we can pause or resume our quality updates and our feature updates. And then if we go down into our configuration profiles, here we can see a bunch of modern workplace configuration profiles that have been added, including the data collection requirements for your devices, Microsoft Edge update channels, Office update channels, and some additional telemetry. If we go into our update rings, here we'll actually see the update rings that have been created by Autopatch, and they are targeting different rings of devices for when they receive their patches. So for example, we'll see a first ring of devices, a fast ring of devices, and then our final broad stage, as well as the test. And I'll go through the specifics of these here shortly. We have some feature update profiles that have been created. Again, we'll see the various rings, test rings, first, fast, and broad. So these help us flight feature updates and our Windows updates on a sort of rolling basis. So, as I mentioned, we have the various update rings that your devices are placed into. But before the devices get placed into update rings, we actually have to onboard our devices into Autopatch. Now for that, we'll go back to our devices here, as I showed earlier, and we'll see that I have several devices that have already been enrolled into Autopatch. And what Autopatch does is actually automatically calculate how many devices you've registered and place them in various groups. And the way that these get placed into these various groups or rings are through a specific calculation that Autopatch does. So depending on the size of your tenant, if your existing managed device size is less than 200, the deployment rings assignment put 5% of your devices into the first ring, 15% of your devices into the fast ring, and the remaining devices go into the broad ring, which are the final 80% of your devices. If your tenant is larger, or the size of your managed devices are larger than 200, we'll have 1% of the devices assigned to the first ring, 9% into the fast ring, and the remaining into the broad ring, which are 90%. It's also recommended to add some of these devices into the test ring, but this has to be done manually. Autopatch doesn't do that automatically. So Microsoft's recommendations, though you can do whatever works for your organization, are to do a minimum of one device if you have 0 to 500 devices, a minimum of 5 devices if you have 500 to 5,000 devices. And if you're managing over 5,000 devices with Autopatch, they recommend a minimum of 50 devices in the test ring. Now, to put a device into the test ring, all we have to do is simply select a device in here or multiple devices, click Device Actions, and assign device group. Once we do that, we'll get this little flyout here, and we can set them to the test ring. Now, what you might notice here when I select this dropdown is we selected 2 devices that are currently in the first ring. If for some reason we had devices that automatically get assigned to a particular ring, but we wanted to switch them to something else, say, for example, we had a VIP or an executive or something like that assigned to the first ring, we're likely going to want them to move out to something like the broad ring. We want them to update a little bit later after the rest of our organization has already gone through some update flights. So that's how we can manage different groups and how they land in there. Now, to onboard devices, what we need to do here, the instructions are pretty straightforward right up at the top. We have to actually place our devices in an Azure AD group that I mentioned earlier, and this gives us a direct link to that group. So if we click here, we'll go right to an Azure AD group, and you can see all of the devices that I had enrolled into Autopatch are here already. To add more in here, we simply go to Add Members and select any devices that we want to add into our Autopatch. Now, this can take some time, up to an hour for newly registered devices to appear here, but we can speed this up a little bit by choosing the Discover Devices button right here. And what this is supposed to do is scan that Azure AD group to see if there are any new devices in here that are ready to register. And we can see here, again, that this a little message that this process can take up to an hour. When I first onboarded these devices, it was about 30 minutes after I had clicked the scan button here. But no real guarantees before they show up by the looks of it. Just up to an hour. So for the most part, that's pretty much all we have to do. There are some additional notes that we've found related to this feature just through talking with the community. We had some questions come up recently in our office hours as well. Feature update management isn't quite there yet for us. So, for example, Windows 10 22H2 isn't yet available in the Autopatch service. Was announced at Ignite back in October that the ability to manage feature updates, including the ability to target specific releases for groups of devices, is coming soon. But I haven't heard any updates since then at this time. And then, of course, something to point out, like the rest of Intune, server patching is not supported. So with this, we're still limited to our Windows 10 and Windows 11 endpoints. But again, that's what our Autopatch service looks like. Pretty straightforward setup. There are a couple of limitations there that I mentioned at the end, but if you're an organization that wants to be a little bit more hands-off with the standard Windows updates, I believe this is at least worth taking a look at for sure.
Thank you, Andrew. Stellar demo as usual. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We hope to see you again tomorrow for another episode of ConfigMas. And you, Andrew, I have a feeling I'll be seeing next week for our office hours on Wednesday.
Oh, you absolutely will. Thank you for having me, though, for one of these ConfigMas demos. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Have a good one, everyone. Bye for now.